Today, I'd like to share with you a story called The Orchard Parable, The Society for the Picking of Apples by James M. Weber, missionary to Japan. Once upon a time, there was an apple grower who had acres and acres of apple trees. In all, he had 10,000 acres of apple orchards. One day, he went to the nearby town. There, he hired 1,000 apple pickers. He told them, "Go to my orchards, harvest the ripe apples, and build storage buildings for them so they will not spoil. I need to be gone for a while, but I will provide all you need to complete the task. When I return, I will reward you for your work. I'll set up a society for the picking of apples. The society to which you will all belong will be responsible for the entire operation. Naturally, in addition to those of you doing the actual harvesting, some will carry supplies, others will care for the physical needs of the group, and still others will have administrative responsibilities." As he set up the society structure, some people volunteered to be pickers and others to be packers. Others put their skills to work as truck drivers, cooks, accountants, storehouse builders, apple inspectors, and even administrators. Every one of his workers could, of course, have picked apples. In the end, however, only 100 of the 1,000 employees wound up as full-time pickers. The 100 pickers started harvesting immediately. 94 of them began picking around the homestead. The remaining 6 looked out toward the horizon. They decided to head out to the faraway orchards. Before long, the storehouses in the 800 acres immediately surrounding the homestead had been filled by the 94 pickers with beautiful, delicious apples. The orchards on the 800 acres around the homestead had thousands of apple trees, but with almost all of the pickers concentrating on them, those trees were soon picked nearly bare. In fact, the 94 apple pickers working around the homestead began having difficulty finding trees which had not been picked. As the apple picking slowed down around the homestead, society members began channeling effort into building larger storehouses and developing better equipment for picking and packing. They even started some schools to train prospective apple pickers to replace those who one day would be too old to pick apples. Sadly, those 94 pickers working around the homestead began fighting among themselves. Incredible as it may sound, some began stealing apples that had already been picked. Although there were enough trees on the 10,000 acres to keep every available worker busy, those working nearest the homestead failed to move into unharvested areas. They just kept working those 800 acres nearest the house. Some on the northern edge sent their trucks to get apples on the southern side, and those on the south side sent their trucks to gather on the east side. Even with all that activity, the harvest on the remaining 9,200 acres was left to just 6 pickers. Those 6 were, of course, far too few to gather all the ripe fruit in those thousands of acres. So by the hundreds of thousands, apples rotted on the trees and fell to the ground. One of the students at the apple picking school showed a special talent for picking apples quickly and effectively. When he heard about the thousands of acres of untouched, faraway orchards, he started talking about going there. His friends discouraged him. They said, "Your talents and abilities make you very valuable around the homestead. You'd be wasting your talents out there. Your gifts can help us harvest apples from the trees on our central 800 acres more rapidly. That will give us more time to build bigger and better storehouses. Perhaps you could even help us devise better ways to use our big storehouses since we've wound up with more space than we need for the present crop of apples." With so many workers and so few trees, the pickers and packers and truck drivers and all the rest of the society for the picking of apples living around the homestead had time for more than just picking apples. They built nice houses and raised their standard of living. Some became very conscious of clothing styles. Thus, when the 6 pickers from the far-off orchards returned to the homestead for a visit, it was apparent that they were not keeping up with the styles in vogue with the other apple pickers and packers. To be sure, those on the homestead were always good to those 6 who worked in the faraway orchards. When any of those 6 returned from the faraway fields, they were given the red carpet treatment. Nonetheless, those 6 pickers were saddened that the Society of the Picking of Apples spent 96% of its budget for bigger and better apple picking methods and equipment and personnel for the 800 acres around the homestead, while it spent only 4% of its budget on all those distant orchards. To be sure, those 6 packers knew that an apple is an apple wherever it may be picked. They knew that the apples around the homestead were just as important as the apples far away. Still, they could not erase from their minds the sight of thousands of trees which had never been touched by a picker. They longed for more pickers to come help them. They longed for help from packers, truck drivers, supervisors, equipment maintenance men, and ladder builders. They wondered if the professionals working back around the homestead could teach them better apple picking methods so that out there where they worked, fewer apples would rot and fall to the ground. Those 6 sometimes wondered to themselves whether or not the Society for the Picking of Apples was doing what the orchard owner had asked it to do. While one might question whether society was doing all the owner wanted done, the members did keep very busy. Several members were convinced that proper apple picking requires nothing less than the very best equipment. Thus, the society assigned several members to develop bigger and better ladders, as well as nicer boxes to store apples. The society also prided itself at having raised the qualification level for full-time apple pickers. When the owner returns, the society members will crowd around him. They'll proudly show off the bigger and better ladders they've built and the nice apple boxes they've designed and made. One wonders how happy that owner will be, however, when he looks out and sees the acres and acres of untouched trees with their unpicked apples.